Bayonets! Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator, and here I've got a practice bayonet. I showed this recently in a video, and I talked a little bit about it. This isn't the video where I'm going to talk massively in depth about this, but I am going to talk a little bit more about bayonets, which, as you know, I do like to talk about. This, for anybody who hasn't seen the previous video, is a spring-loaded training bayonet from probably from World War I. It could perhaps be from just before World War I. It doesn't have any dates on it, but similar models to this. I know Nick Thomas from AHF, he has one that's exactly the same model as this, and his is dated, I think, 1915. Yeah, so what were these used for? They were used for bayonet fencing, obviously. And, you know, a lot of people, I guess, know that bayonets were used in World War I, but a prevailing opinion that often comes up is that, oh, you know, these crazy bayonet charges were just, you know, it was the lions led by donkeys sort of idea that came about actually originally in the 1920s and 30s. The idea that the infantry fighting in, and cavalry in fact, fighting in World War I were somehow betrayed by terrible generals who didn't have a clue what they were doing. And this idea, lots of people think they're very clever, going, oh, well, you know, those World War I generals, they didn't have a clue. I'm far more clever than them. That's what they're implying, of course. They think they know far better than World War I generals, and of course they don't. The fact is that World War I was seen through different eyes afterwards for many different political and military reasons, and later, in more recent times, since the 1960s, it has been viewed based in the light of what happened with World War II as well. And actually, when you go back and study the primary sources and look at World War I in more depth, you very quickly find out that, you know, lots of things changed in World War I, and actually a lot of the widely held ideas and views about World War I are actually being challenged now. In many cases are being shown to be completely wrong. You know, one of the common ones is the idea that soldiers spent months and months in the trenches. Well, of course they didn't. Certainly in the British Army, they were cycled in and out, and various other ideas. And one of these is, coming back to bayonets, is about bayonet charges, or the use of bayonets being some kind of folly, some kind of thing that generals were making their soldiers do for no reason, and it was leading to huge loss of life. Well, essentially that's kind of wrong, and what I'm just going to put this down for a minute. It's not, I have to say, once again, I'll just mention this weighs about 9 pounds. Okay, this is a whopping great thing. But this is not really a review, but if you're interested in this subject, this is a very good book to get. And I understand, so Aaron Taylor Miedema, I'm not really sure how to say the surname. Obviously I'll post a link to this below. He actually posted on one of my videos, I think it was probably more than a year ago now, suggesting that I get his book, and I did. But then, because I always have a big pile of books to read, and it's called Bayonets and Blobsticks. Now, I love the word blobstick, and I was actually talking to Lucy about this book earlier. Well, she asked me what I was reading, because I was reading this earlier, and I said, oh, it's Bayonets and Blobsticks. And yeah, she now loves the word blobstick as well. What is a blobstick? It's a training aid for teaching people to use bayonets, but I won't go into that right now. So it's Bayonets and Blobsticks, the Canadian experience of close combat in World War I, 1915 to 1918. And it's really great, because it takes, to my reading anyway, it takes a very neutral look at the whole topic of how were bayonets used in World War I, how have people viewed since then, how have people, historians and other writers, viewed the use of bayonets in World War I, which alludes to what I was just talking about. Are they making assumptions? Are they bringing in their own baggage about, you know, perceived ideas about the craziness of World War I, the futility of World War I, all of this kind of stuff, things that people assume they know about World War I. And actually looking at some statistics as well. So the fact that there's a disparity. So one of the things I found fascinating, and in fact, there's bits of this book right at the beginning you can read that will instantly open your mind to looking at the topic in new ways. And one of the things is people often cite the number of, or the proportion, the percentage of people wounded by bayonets in World War One. But what they often don't look at is the percentage of people killed by bayonets in World War One. And often these are completely differently, they're recorded in different places. There's a different size of statistic recorded, all this kind of stuff. And you know, there are instances where there was a single action, and in that single action, it seems like potentially up to 50% of the people who were killed by bayonets. And yet, if you look at the number of people who were wounded by bayonets, it's like less than 1%. And so there's this massive disparity. What does that mean? Does that mean that bayonets are actually very lethal? Or does it just mean that when bayonets were used, it was a different type of encounter and it was sort of to the death, and that's why the bayonets were being used? Or, you know, and it's an incredibly complicated topic. Of course, World War One, there wasn't only one type of fighting in World War One. It wasn't only trench fighting. It was highly mobile at the beginning, and it was more mobile at the end. It wasn't only the Western Front, or this focuses on the Western Front. Obviously, there was combat in the Middle East as well in this time, and so it's a very, very complicated topic, and you know, there's some very interesting statistics thrown in here. So one of the things that came up, which I thought was very, very interesting, was about Victoria Crosses. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Victoria Cross is the highest level of gallantry, so it's like the Purple Heart, I think, in America. It's the highest medal of bravery that you can receive in the British Armed Forces. So a typical assumption is that, made by modern people, is that the bayonet in modern times is obsolete, and that it was also obsolete in World War One. Despite the fact that we all know that bayonets were used in World War One, it fulfills all of the literature of the period and the imagery and everything, and it's not just propaganda stuff. It's in the personal accounts, you know, and the Victoria Cross statistics, if you want to call it that, really kind of highlights that. So I'm just going to read a section. So Aaron says, there are a substantial number of references to challenge the notion of the bayonet's obsolescence. Tim Cook wrote that too many references to successful bayonet use are made in after-battle reports and in the account of medal citations to discount the effectiveness of the weapon in battle. Okay, that seems true, seems reasonable on the surface of it. A survey of 58 Victoria Crosses awarded to members of Canadian infantry, only Canadian infantry formations, support Cook's conclusion. 13 of these Victoria Cross citations include direct reference to bayonet use or hand-to-hand fighting. The accounts of bayonet fighting in official records, battalion histories and personal accounts of the Canadian Corps number in the hundreds. And this is true, and this doesn't actually just apply to World War One. If you're thinking, oh, I'm not that into World War One, it applies to the 19th century as well. This is exactly true of, you know, my favourite period, the Crimean War and the Indian Mutiny. So people will often look at statistics and go, oh, well, you know, most of the people were killed by shelling and by bullets and, you know, other kind of disease, obviously disease, and cold and all these kind of things. But so statistically, obviously, these kind of hand-to-hand encounters go down. But then when you actually start reading personal accounts, you realise, well, there are loads of these personal accounts, like in the Indian Mutiny. There are many accounts, for example, in the Siege of Delhi, where, yes, we know the vast majority of people were shot by bullets, but then there's a lot of the personal accounts go, and we had to clear out a building at bayonet point. Does that mean they wounded or killed all the people with bayonets? No. But they cleared out a building at bayonet point, and that was not something you could have done with single shot rifles or muskets in that period, because you go boom, and what do you do after you shot? Well, you need a club or a pointy thing or something to clear the people out of the room. Otherwise they go bang, oh, I've not been shot, I'm still in the building, I'm not going to run away, because you're not presenting any credible threat. And that's something that Aaron picks up as well, is that, and I made this in previous videos, you don't always need to stab someone with a bayonet for that weapon to be effective. If you can make them leave a building or run away or whatever, then that's a very effective weapon, because that's exactly what you need to do as infantry, is take and hold ground. And it goes on. It's really, really, it's a really, really great book, and it breaks down a lot of these common accusations that are put against the fact that hand-to-hand combat bayonets were obsolete by World War One, and it challenges that. And I'm not saying, I don't want it to be thought that I'm just, because I'm interested in fencing and swords and bayonets, that I'm always championing the cause of hand-to-hand combat and blindly against the statistics. I fully accept, obviously, in World War One, most people were killed by shelling and other, you know, not even enemy actions, just by cold and things like that. But absolutely, I think it's wrong, based on the sources we have, all the sources, not just medical reports, but also looking at personal accounts, descriptions of clearing out trenches and this kind of stuff. It's wrong to sort of poo-poo the effectiveness of the bayonet. So I might read some more bits of this book actually, because it's very, very good, and it's got some really sort of groundbreaking, cutting-edge stuff in it. Cutting edge, haha. I will probably refer to this book in the future, but I'm only just getting into it myself at the moment. As I say, it's been sitting on a pile of to-do books, and to-read books rather, for me for quite a while. But Bayonets and Blobsticks by Aaron Taylor Miedema. Sorry, Miedema. Oh, I'm terrible with names. I'm really sorry for butchering your name, Aaron. But anyway, I'll put the link to this book below. You know, if you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend it. What I have read of it so far, which is probably only about a fifth or quarter of the book, is great stuff. And I love the fact that Aaron has approached this, as I try to do with history myself, starting from, I guess this is my archaeological training, from a neutral viewpoint, and break it down into logical points and address each of these points, and then make my decision based on that, not going into it with a decision pre-made and then forcing the sources to support your opinion, which I'm afraid to say a fair number of historians do. Right, so there we go. Bayonets and Blobsticks, highly recommended, link below. And you know I'm going to be talking more about bayonets, especially the butt and penetration, and this great book I'll probably read some more from. So cheers folks, see you for the next video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon, and you can follow us on Facebook.